Hello, everyone, and welcome to, let's say, the State of Hearthstone. It's been a while since I've done a sort of video with my thoughts on the metagame, and this is a little bit more than that. This is sort of my thoughts on, like, kind of where Hearthstone is, has been, and seems to be going. Um, and spoiler alert, I think it's the wrong place and the wrong direction. Maybe not the wrong direction, but a lot of decisions that have been made in the recent past, and even more so in the sort of slightly more distant past, have really made me less happy with how things are going in the world of Hearthstone, and a little bit less confident that they will be heading in the right direction. Um, Before I really get into all of that, I do want to say that I'm going to be taking a extended break from streaming, which may translate into less content on YouTube because I don't have a big bank of stuff sort of saved up to post. But that is not related to my current thoughts on Hearthstone. I sort of already decided that I was going to take a extended break from streaming, which is going to be about a month that I'm going to be away from at least my normal scheduled streaming, both for sort of the holidays and just generally to actually take a break from things, which is the first time I've taken more than like a week off or so from streaming since I started like doing it more or less full time 10 years ago. So, that is not me rage quitting Hearthstone or anything like that. That is me already taking a planned break from streaming. So don't read too much more into that than there is. But anyway, let's talk about it. The state of Hearthstone. In short, it ain't good. Um, there was obviously a recent patch that nerfed some sort of standout problem cards in the current metagame. And if you're someone who has watched my stream or has watched, some of the highlights that show up on YouTube, you will probably have noticed that I have been for a while basically complaining about Ethereal Oracle, and how it was bonkers to me that Ethereal Oracle got printed as it is, and insisting that it obviously would be nerfed, and then it wasn't nerfed in this most recent balance update. Um, and the only explanation that I can really come up with that you wouldn't nerf Ethereal Oracle in this particular update is that it is one of the few cards from the new set that is seeing a lot of play, and seeing success in high-level competitive decks. And while I can understand to some extent that argument, because there is a lot of sort of sentiment surrounding the Great Dark Beyond as it's a bad set. A lot of people saying, oh, it didn't impact the metagame, it's a bad set, blah, blah, blah. And I think the reality is, I think Great Dark Beyond is a great set in the sort of gameplay that it tries to encourage and the sort of fun style of building up to things with starships that I think that it aims to do. But the problem is that the sets before it don't do that. That so many of the sets for so long in Hearthstone have not been about that. That you can't just shoehorn that in with one set at the end of an expansion cycle, and actually have the impact that I would hope that it might be able to have, but it's not realistic, right? It's not realistic to try to shift everything that Hearthstone has like kind of become over the past few years, and kind of revert it to something which is like we're about board based, building up to things, minion combat, etc. And those of you who have watched my stream and have watched many of my highlights over the years may, recognize that obviously I am someone who is not a big fan of, particularly in Hearthstone, one-turn kill style combo decks, essentially decks that, would lead to Twitch chat to spam the fun and interactive meme. And the reason for that, some people will say in the comments, is like, you like to play control decks, blah, 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 you just want to win more with your control decks, which isn't the case at all. The reality is, and I've talked about this a lot relating to Magic, and people ask why I like to play like creature decks in Magic and mid-range decks in Magic, and the reason isn't just like I like attacking with big creatures. I do, it's fun, but it's that creatures in Magic and also minions in Hearthstone are the only game level interaction that exists, which is to say, the only cards that have rules for which you will interact with your opponent are creatures and magic and minions in Hearthstone, right? Every other card in the game only interacts if it tells you it does explicitly, right? Interaction is creature combat, minion combat, fundamentally, right? And I feel like, Hearthstone has moved away from that being the focus of the game to an extent that is to its vast detriment over the past couple of years. Some of that is, due to the rise of like one-turn kill combo style decks. But a lot of that is also that it is just too easy to kill minions without using your own minions in a lot of cases, right? Like, it's not just OTK decks are too good, it is control decks are too good. There are too many good ways to just sweep the board over and over, like, look at like Control Warrior. There's a Control Warrior deck right now in Hearthstone Standard that is just about like infinitely playing the Ceaseless Expanse. And that isn't really something that leads to, minion combat. It just leads to everything dying all the time. And it isn't to say that that sort of thing existing in some capacity isn't okay, right? That thing is actually, I think that there being a like deck that is focused on, I'm going to do this thing over and over and create a loop, that's okay, as long as there's ways to interact with it, and as long as that's not just like the primary thing that is going on. That, and because of decks that are aiming to, wipe the board repeatedly very easily all the time, you end up pushing people toward decks that are capable of killing you in a single turn. And I got into this, and as I said to people who are watching me streaming this, because I'm doing this live, not all of my thoughts on this have been fully formed. I'm kind of doing this in a little bit of a stream of consciousness fashion. But overall, right, like, I feel like the best card from The Great Dark Beyond, being Ethereal Oracle, really points to this problem that I'm talking about, right? Which is that you just have more things that kind of push you in that direction, rather than pushing you in the direction of, the sort of gameplay that The Great Dark Beyond wants to encourage with things like Starships, right? Or Draenei. Things that are like, I am going to play this minion, which sets up a plan of future minions, which I can then act upon over the course of the game. And because these involve minions, there's a lot of back and forth going on. Whereas the best card being Ethereal Oracle is like, hey, not only like do you want to play this with spells, but you specifically want to play it with cheap spells, so you have lots of ways to spell burst this and then play those afterwards. And you also want to play with burn spells to give you spell damage. I do think, by the way, that Ethereal Oracle being a card that sees play in decks whose only spell damage outlet is Snake Oil for Miracle Salesman, look it up, there's a bunch of them actually, is really indicative of just how ridiculously powerful this card's effect is, right? Like, just draw 2 cards, from casting a spell, because the game naturally, and let me get into this a little bit. It's just such a powerful effect to, just draw 2 cards for effectively nothing, as long as you're playing a spell that's doing something on the board. But specifically, like, the game engine, right? Like, of being a game that is built around mana, encourages you to play things that are less expensive, because it is easier to play out your cards if you have cards that are cheap. That's just naturally, like, if you look at like the decks that are successful over the course of Hearthstone's history, a huge percentage of them are decks that just have a ton of cheap stuff, i.e. rogue decks, whether they're combo decks or like, pressure tempo oriented rogue decks. Bunch of cheap stuff historically has been one of the ways you've had to be successful in Hearthstone. And having the best card in your new set be a card that has nothing to do with the primary themes that the set is focusing on and trying to encourage this board-based gameplay and building up to things, but instead being a card that incentivizes you playing a bunch of cheap stuff that is already good based on just the way that the game engine works, right? It's just more pressure to do the thing that's already good, and also encourages you to play things that are planning to kill your opponent in a single turn, because you can just draw your spells and play your cheap spells and like have spell damage to make those things more dangerous. It's just kind of baffling to me that this is the point that we're at, and that in the even after release, when it is very clear that this is happening with Ethereal Oracle, that it is not one of the targets chosen for nerfs in this particular patch. And like, similarly, like so many of the cards that are in this set, like, I feel like there's a good push with a lot of the Starships and things like that going in a direction of like, hey, play to the board, build up stuff. And then there's like Shaman with Asteroids, which I feel like we've just seen this before so many times, like with Garrote Rogue or whatever. It's like, okay, you just have spell damage and card draw. And then you have spell damage and card draw on one card in Ethereal Oracle. This makes these sort of things so incredibly frustrating and powerful, and having no axis of interaction that exists against them, right? Like, it's weird to me that we have a world in which we have stuff like Asteroid slash Incendious Shaman and no way to possibly interact with those along the lines of Steam Cleaner, right? Like, that at least gives you the card level way to interact with them, which isn't nearly as satisfying as having a game level way of interacting with them, like these things being based on keeping a minion on the board or something. But again, that is so difficult in the current environment, because of just the sheer power of so many of the removal effects, and particularly board clear effects that work. So it's kind of this it's kind of this just like confluence of a bunch of things where I just feel like, we're in, like, Hearthstone just isn't in a very good place right now. And I have had the experience multiple times over the past, let's say, 6 months, maybe a year, where I've had the thought, maybe Hearthstone just isn't for me anymore. And that sucks, right? Like, it really, really sucks to feel like something that you have spent so much time playing and have enjoyed to such a great degree over a very long time has kind of diverged from what it is that you enjoy to such a point that you're like, I just don't want to play this anymore. And it's not like just a matter of, I don't want to stream this anymore. It's like, there are lots of metagames in Hearthstone where, like, I have finished my stream, gone and eaten dinner, and then just fired up Hearthstone again to just play with new decks and try new things. I am not doing that nowadays. I am not doing that, and have not been doing that for a while. Like, prior to this patch, I took over a week off from streaming Hearthstone and was streaming Magic, because I just didn't enjoy the sort of gameplay that the set was encouraging, and that the metagame was encouraging. And I was hoping with the patch that would change. It did not change. I streamed for a couple of days, and a huge percentage of my games were not only against decks that were, utilizing Ethereal Oracle, which I thought was so obviously a card that should have been nerfed, but were specifically decks that were doing things that, were killing me in a single turn, or were killing me in a way that I had no meaningful way to interact with. And you can say, well, you need to play different decks. It's like, okay, but if you make the game such that you are either playing a hyper-aggressive deck that kills the opponent very quickly, or you are playing a combo deck, or you're playing a hyper-extreme control deck, you lose so much of what makes the game, for lack of better words, fun and interactive, right? Like, if you don't have the possibility to play any kind of, like, mid-range minion style of deck and be successful, I think that the game is in a bad place. And that's based on just the kind of the nature of what interactivity means in Hearthstone, and where the game level interactivity comes from, which is from minions fighting minions, right? If you, have like a metagame in which stuff like mid-range Paladin is actually a reasonable thing to play, and you can say, Libram Paladin, does exist. And that, I think, is, one of the very few shining stars of the metagame, which is a weird thing to say. But I feel like just so much of the metagame that has happened over the past couple of years just pressures that in such a way that like, it is at such extremes, right? And this isn't a new thing. It isn't like this just happened. And I feel like, I don't think that right now Hearthstone is in as bad a state in my mind as it was back in, like, for instance, Stormwind, right? When, like, all of the good decks were quest decks and everything was about just, like, killing your opponent with these various quest-related things, and which were mostly damage combos that you couldn't interact with in a meaningful way. But, I just think that it has clearly been at a point for a while where you are either, like, just spewing an insane amount of stats into the board with things like Pain Warlock, or, like the Swarm Shaman decks, all of which were nerfed, or, like Dungar Druid or whatever, like, you're just kind of vomiting a ton of stats. There's no back and forth, right? It's, I just throw everything at you, and you kill it or you don't, or I just kill you in a single turn, are a huge percentage of what's happening in the gameplay there. And I just want to see games have a back and forth again, right? I want to see there be, like, I play a guy, you play a guy, and I decide whether I want to value trade, rather than, like, every single minion that ever sees play having rush. Like, that's one of the things about, like, like, minion combat tension, board tension, the decision of do I go face or do I trade isn't interesting if like rush is such an easily accessible mechanic because you just kill their guy and then go face next turn if your guy's still around, right? So I think that again, I don't think that this is a problem of the latest set, right? I think the latest set is the set that is the closest to getting it right in a long time in Hearthstone, because again, like the stuff that things like starships do, and I love the starship mechanic, by the way. I think it's fantastic. Um, you obviously have lots of kind of frustrating play patterns that do exist from the decks that actually play starships right now that are like gaining 8 million armor and things, because that is the sort of thing your deck needs to do in a world where people are exploding you with asteroids or with copied copied burn spells from Lanessa or whatever. No longer copied things from Sonya, but that's only as of like a couple of days ago. And there's no like, hey, I'm going to build up to actually like launching this and trying to use it as a thing. It's mostly I'm just trying to use it to stay alive, or I'm trying to use it to kill you in one turn with Biopod or whatever. So yeah, I would love to see Hearthstone with its next patch, its next mini set, maybe even just the next rotation. Maybe we're too far gone to be able to make enough changes reasonably to the card pool that exists for the game to kind of reach a state that I think is healthy. But until like we have huge swaths of cards go away, right? But I'm not confident because like look at just not only just the recent balance decisions, right? Like not nerfing Ethereal Oracle, but look at Bob, right? We're in this really weird place where like coming into the set of the Great Dark Beyond, there was this decision to nerf all these cards, which like put pressure on like trying to build to a powerful thing like a starship. They nerfed Yogg, they nerfed Reska, and then they printed Bob. And obviously the effect of Bob, of taking your opponent's minion and putting it into your hand, is not as powerful as taking control of it and immediately have it in the board. Not even close to that, right? But it is also a much cheaper card that is a neutral, that can go into any deck. And I think that one of the things that has been frustrating over the past year or so or more in Hearthstone is that it is difficult to feel like your minion's text matters if it doesn't have an effect right away. And this is something that like in Magic we would call like the Goblin Guide or Titan problem from many years ago, which is that if your creature, if your minion isn't either hyper efficient and pressure your opponent and kill them before they can do anything, or have some massive effect when it comes into play immediately, it's irrelevant, right? Like, what good Death Rattle minions exist? And again, outside of like Dungar that puts all of them in play at once, what good like Death Rattle minions have been played, in the past year and a half, right? Some of that is attributable to the power level of one-turn kill decks, whether they are things like Lanessa, whether they're things like Sith Mage that was a kind of metagame tyrant for however long. Things like whatever, like the one turn kill slash combo decks, and then also things like Reno or Yogg or Reska and now Bob. All of these things kind of make the text on your cards irrelevant, right? And like Death Rattle, I think is one of the cool like, hey, I'm building to a thing style of sort of strategies that exist in Hearthstone. That like I'm going to try to avoid, like play a slightly less efficient pressure minion, but it's harder for you to kill. That's just not really a thing outside of like really, really, extreme strategies like Dungar or Elise or whatever, because it's like so easy to deal with any individual one thing with something like a Yogg or, now Reno's been nerfed, and Reno was kind of the like the epitome of this. Of like, it didn't matter what you did prior to this point. And I am someone who liked Reno more than most, right? Like, I actually think that the Highlander mechanic is a cool one. Though I do think that like, the pinnacle of Highlander in every single class being everything up to this point in the game didn't matter. Maybe not the best design when you're trying to have interactive games. But yeah, it is very odd to me that you would sort of take the stance of we want to preemptively nerf Yogg and Reno coming into this Starship metagame, Well, yeah, it wasn't even Yogg and Reska and then Reno afterwards, and then you print Bob. Like I was playing a game the other day, and granted, again, like I don't make claims that like necessarily all the decks that I play are like even intended to be competitive. But like I was playing a an amalgam deck, and I had gotten a copy of my amalgam, and like had two amalgams that had like like rush and cleave and and poisonous. I'm gonna say death touch. My streams are crossing because I keep making analogies to Magic. And like it was this long, interesting game where like at the end of the game, like my opponent, it was like they're playing Rogue, and they had like they played like a Rexar, but like I had no cards in my deck. So every turn I was drawing an amalgam that's killing all their stuff, and then they just played Bob and stole my guy, and then they shadow stepped it and stole the other copy, and I'm like, oh, cool. I'm glad I bothered trying, right? And like it's not to say that I don't think there should be anything that interact with these, but Bob is like not even just like that's not all it does, right? The card is like a Frost Nova on a body. It like it having this kind of incidental effect of ruin the thing that you've tried to build up this entire game, along with these other effects. It's not just that in isolation; it's that it is a neutral that has all this other modality, and is this thing in the context of making balance changes to protect investment in long-term plans, such as nerfing Yogg, nerfing Reska, nerfing Reno. It blows my mind that we have the philosophy of one, and then the design decision, at least the stated philosophy of one, and then the design decision of the other, which is the same perspective I have on Ethereal Oracle, right? How are we saying that what we are trying to do is create a world in which there is more board tension and interactivity, and games are more minion based, and then printing the best card as being something which has nothing to do with any of that, and in fact encourages the exact opposite of it, and not nerfing it when we have the opportunity to? And it is clear it should be. For what reason? Right? So that's why my kind of long-term like confidence in Hearthstone right now is shaky. Because I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand the design philosophy that is making these decisions happen. And it's not just a matter of like balance, right? It's like, what are we even doing here? How are we getting to a world where we have these stated goals and then making these choices, right? So I don't know what the best direction necessarily is. I don't know how to fix it, right? Because this is a matter of like years of accumulated like issues that you can't make go away by releasing a set that is the game that you want it to be when all those other sets still exist. And it's not easy to just like nerf every single thing down the road because the next best thing pops up. And that's exactly what happened, right, with like the Ethereal Oracle decks of various kinds. It's like, okay, well, you nerfed this one. Now it's this other one that just does the same thing but was worse than the other thing, in a different way. And it's not easy, right? I don't suggest that it is an easy job to get the game into a state that is healthy and fun. Because that's the biggest issue is like it's not a matter of balance, it's a matter of fun. Right? Like my argument isn't that the game, whether or not the game is balanced. In fact, I think people's perception of like what is important in like game like live balancing is very often totally wrong. Right? They're like, oh, all these classes have similar win rates, so we're in a good spot. You can have a metagame where every single class has the 50% win rate. There is no deck that is like, any better than any other, like statistically, and is incredibly boring to play or incredibly non-interactive or whatever. And that metagame sucks, right? The important thing is not balance. The important thing is fun. And I feel like in many ways, because a lot of the design decisions that have been made, both with respect to initial design and with respect to actual balance patches, Hearthstone has been missing the fun for a long time. And I want to see it get it back. So that's where I'm at. That's my thoughts on Hearthstone right now. Again, I'm not rage quitting Hearthstone. I am just expressing my frustration that a game that I have loved for a very long time is in a position now where I no longer love it, and I don't really feel like playing. Um, and again, I'm not rage quitting Hearthstone. I'm taking time off for a wide variety of reasons. But yeah, I am hopeful at least that the people at Blizzard are receptive to this being a problem. And I am hopeful that they will find ways to solve that problem, and kind of get back to steering the ship in the right direction, as it were, because it has felt somewhat rudderless, at least with regard to, again, sort of stated goals meeting action. And I hope in 2025, which is at this point pretty likely the next time I actually play Hearthstone, things are looking up rather than whatever it is they're looking like right now. So thanks for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your year and early 2025, because who knows if we'll see you until then. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.